to the channel. In today's video, we are going to be finishing off our Pokemon Sapphire water-only Nuzlock. If you haven't seen the past few videos, then I highly recommend going to check them out. And if you end up enjoying this video, please remember to hit that like button because it really helps out the channel. And if you really enjoy my content, why not just click that subscribe button? It's free and you can always change your mind. But with that, let's get into the video. First, we finally arrive in Satopolis, and then we have to go find Kyogre. Steven and Wallace end up leading us over to this cave that apparently has Kyogre in it. And since this is a water-only Nuzlock, I thought it's appropriate that we have to catch Kyogre since he's a water-type legendary. You won't actually be using him in this Nuzlock, but it will be still really cool to catch him since he's the main legendary of this game. And after using the blue orb, Kyogre comes right over to us. And in just a little while, I'm able to catch Kyogre pretty easily. Next, I give Kyogre the nickname Finn, and now we can continue on to the 8th gym leader. Wallace shouldn't be too hard because we just caught an electric-type Pokemon, Bulb. Wallace starts off with Love Disc, and I start off with Bulb. Bulb is able to knock out Love Disc and one Thunderbolt. Next out is Whiscash, so I decide to switch into Bolly. When I send out Bolly, Wallace makes a pretty stupid mistake by using Rain Dance, and then I use Dive. Rain Dance is just going to power up my water-type moves, and my Dive does a decent amount of damage to Whiscash. Next, Whiscash uses Earthquake, and then I use Bubble Beam. Bubble Beam is almost enough to take out Whiscash, and then of course Wallace uses a Hyper Potion. Next, Whiscash uses Amnesia, and then I decide to go for another Dive. Then Whiscash uses another Amnesia, so my Dive does basically nothing. Next, I decide to switch into Splashy to intimidate Whiscash, and then Whiscash uses Rain Dance again. I decide to go for Hydro Pump, but somehow miss it, and then I get hit with a Water Pulse. I go for another Hydro Pump, and this time it hits, but it does an abysmal amount of damage. Next, I go for Surf, which also does an abysmal amount of damage, and I keep getting hit with Water Pulse. Next, I go for Strength, which does a little bit more, and then I go for a Bite, hoping for a flinch, but I don't get one. Of course, I get confused, and then luckily I break through to use Strength and knock out a Whiscash. Next in is Celio, so I decide to switch into Bulb. I decide to use Thunderbolt, and it's almost a one-hit KO for Celio, but luckily Celio gets paralyzed. I get hit with a Body Slam, and then my next Thunderbolt is enough to take out Celio. Next in is Seaking, and I decide to stay in. I decide to go for Thunderbolt, which does a little over half the Seaking. Next, Seaking uses Rain Dance, and then luckily misses a Tornadrill, and I'm able to take him out in one more Thunderbolt. Next in is my Milotic, and I decide to just stay in. My Milotic goes for Water Pulse, which doesn't do a ton to me, and then I use Thunder Wave. I go for another Thunderbolt, doing a decent amount to my Milotic, and then my Milotic uses another Water Pulse. Next, since I'm getting low on HP, I decide to go for a Confuse Ray. Next, my Milotic hurts itself in Confusion, and then the rain stops. I go for another Thunderbolt, almost taking out my Milotic, and then my Milotic uses Recover. Next, I use another Thunderbolt, and then my Milotic uses Water Pulse. Luckily, I'm able to hit through Confusion and use another Thunderbolt, but unfortunately, my Milotic uses another Recover. Next turn, I'm able to break through Confusion again and use Thunderbolt, and then my Milotic uses another Recover. Next, I go for Confuse Ray again, and then my Milotic ends up hitting itself in Confusion, and then I snap out of Confusion and use Thunderbolt. My Milotic again uses Recover, and this is getting really tiring now, but I keep spamming Thunderbolt, and then I get hit with a Twister. Here I'm in range of being taken out, so I do have to switch into Muddy. Luckily, my Milotic hits itself on the swap, and then I use Mud Shot, lowering its speed. Again, my Milotic gets healed, but this time with a Hyper Potion. I use another Mud Shot, which does a decent amount of damage, so here I just spam Mud Shot until I take out my Milotic. And just like that, we have defeated the final gym leader, Wallace. Now it's time to head to the Pokemon League. So I go up this waterfall, and we have reached Victory Road. At the end of Victory Road, Wally wants to battle, but this battle isn't very interesting, so I thought I might just skip over it. I end up defeating Wally no problem, and now it's finally time to defeat the Elite Four. First up is Sydney. Sydney starts off with Mightyena, and I start off with Muddy. I use Earthquake, and it luckily hits even though I got hit with a Sand Attack. Then I get hit with Crunch, and then my Earthquake misses. I decide to go for a Rock Smash, but that also misses, and now I'm really low on HP already. I get hit with another Crunch, getting down to 8 HP, and then finally I take out Mightyena. Next, I decide to switch out into Bluey for Cacturn. Next, I hit Cacturne with a really strong fly, and then I get hit with a Cotton Spore, lowering my speed. Cacturne hits me with a feint attack, and then luckily I'm able to take him out in one more fly. Next in is Sharpedo, so I decide to send in Bulb. I get hit with a slash, and then I hit him with one Thunderbolt, taking out Sharpedo. Next in is Absol, so I decide to stay in and use Confuse Ray. Absol decides to use Snatch once again, and I decide to use Thunder Wave. Next, I decide to use Thunderbolt, and Absol uses Swords Dance. I decide to use Waterfall, hoping for a flinch, but it ends up being a crit and taking out Absol. Next in is Shift Tree, so I decide to send in Bluey. I get hit with a Fake Out, and then get hit with a Swagger, and then unfortunately Bluey hits itself in Confusion. I decide to send in Splashy instead of Bluey, intimidating Shift Tree. Shift Tree goes for Double Team, and then I use Ice Beam, which is super effective against Shift Tree. Shifty gets frozen solid, and then I go for a Strength, hoping to not get him into the red, but unfortunately I do. Next, I decide to use another Strength, and then go for Ice Beam again. I almost take out Shift Tree, and then I get hit with Swagger, and then Sydney goes for a full restore while I hit Shift Tree with an Ice Beam. I decide to go for Strength, and then get hit with an extra Sensory, snapping out of Confusion, and then missing my Strength. I get hit with yet another Swagger, and then I hurt myself in Confusion, and then get hit with another extra Sensory, getting flinched. I decide to switch into Bluey, and then I get hit with an extra Sensory, and then next a Swagger, and then I get hit in Confusion, taking me down to 14 HP. I need to switch again, so I switch into Sassy. Psychic moves don't affect Sassy, so I go for Slash, and then I get hit with a Swagger. Luckily, I'm able to break out Confusion, use Slash, and now we have defeated the first Elite Four member, Sydney. Now it's time to face Phoebe. Phoebe starts off with Dusclops, and I start off with Muddy. I use Water Pulse, and then I get hit with a Shadow Punch. Next turn I use another Water Pulse, and then I get hit with Confuse Ray. Luckily, Muddy is able to hit through Confusion and take Dusclops out with one Muddy Water. Next in is Bayonet, so I decide to switch into Splashy. First I decide to go for Rain Dance, but then unfortunately Bayonet uses Spite, taking out 3 of my Rain Dances. Next I go for Surf, which does a little less than half, and then I get hit with another Spite. I go for one more Surf, almost taking out Bayonet, and then I get hit with another Spite. Phoebe uses a full restore, and then I go for another Surf, and then all it takes is one more Surf to take out Bayonet. Next in is Sableye, so I decide to stay in. The rain stops, and then I go for another Surf, doing a decent amount of damage. Unfortunately, I get hit with an Attract, so I decide to switch into Bulb. Bayonet uses Shadow Ball, doing a decent amount of damage, so then I think for a little bit, and I decide to go for Waterfall, hoping for a flinch. I don't get a flinch, but then I get hit with another Shadow Ball, but one more Waterfall is enough to take out Sableye. Next is Phoebe's other Dusclops, so I decide to send in Sassy. I decide to use Crunch, and then Sassy gets hit with a Confuse Ray. Dusclops eats a berry, and then I decide to go for another Crunch. Luckily, I hit through Confusion, and I'm almost able to take out Dusclops, and then I get hit with an Earthquake, which is unfortunately a crit, taking out Sassy. Unfortunately now, I have to switch into Bali, and then I decide to use Dive, which does not do a lot of damage. Then I get hit with a pretty strong Shadow Ball, but my Bubble Beam does a decent amount. Next, I get hit with a Confuse Ray, and then I decide to go for a Dive, but then hit myself in Confusion and get hit with another Shadow Ball. I decide to switch back into Splashy, and then I use Ice Beam, freezing Dusclops, and then on the next turn I'm able to take out Dusclops with one more Surf. Next out is Bayonet, so I decide to switch into Muddy. I decide to go for Water Pulse, unfortunately getting hit with a Toxic. My Water Pulse does a decent amount, and then I get hit with a crit Shadow Ball, and then one more Muddy Water takes out Bayonet. And just like that, we have defeated Phoebe. Next up is Glacia. Glacia starts with Glalie, and I start off with Muddy. Glalie uses Hail, and then I use Water Pulse. I get hit with Hail, and then I decide to go for a Rock Smash. It does a decent amount of damage and lowers Glalie's defense. Next, I get hit with an Ice Beam, doing a decent amount of damage, and then I go for another Rock Smash, and then next turn, Glacia heals. My Rock Smashes are doing a decent amount of damage since her defense is lowered, but now I need to switch because I'm in range of being taken out. I decide to switch into Bali, and I get hit with an Ice Beam, not doing a lot of damage. Next, I go for a Rollout, which does a lot of damage to Glalie, and then I get hit with a Crunch. My next Rollout takes out Glalie. Next out is Celio, and I decide to stay in, and my next Rollout takes out her Celio in one hit. Next out is her other Celio, and my Rollout again is able to take Celio out in one hit. Next out is Glalie, and you can see where this is going. I decide to stay in, and I get hit with a Crunch. I do get pretty low on HP, but my last Rollout is able to take out Glalie in one hit. Now I need to switch, so I decide to switch into Bulb. I decide to go for a Confuse Ray, and then luckily Walrein ends up hitting itself in Confusion. I decide to go for a Thunderbolt, doing a lot of damage to Walrein, and then Walrein hits itself in confusion and ends up eating its berry. Next, I decide to go for another Thunderbolt, and it ends up being a crit, just enough to take out Walrein. Just like that, we've defeated Glacia, and now it's time to defeat Drake. Next out is Shelgon, and I decide to start with Muddy. Muddy uses Earthquake, doing a ton of damage to Shelgon, and then I get hit with a Rock Tomb. Next, I get hit with a Dragon Claw, but luckily my next Earthquake is enough to take out Shelgon. Next out is Altaria, and for some reason I decide to stay in, but then I realize I need to switch, so I decide to switch into Bali. Altaria's Dragon Breaths are pretty weak, but luckily my rollout does a good bit of damage, and this can be pretty risky, but I'm able to take out Altaria with 3 rollouts and have just enough HP to be able to switch back into a different Pokemon. I decide to switch into Splashy for Flygon, because Flygon is 4 times weak to Ice. I decide to go for an Ice Beam, almost taking out Flygon, and then I decide to go for a Strength. Now my Ice Beam should be enough to take out Flygon. Luckily, all Flygon did was start a Sandstorm. Next is his other Flygon, and I want to save Gyarados for his final Pokemon. Salamence is his strongest Pokemon, so I decide to send in Bluey, and Bluey basically doesn't do anything. He hits a Fly, which is really weak, and then hits an Aerial Ace, which does almost nothing. So I need to switch out, so I decide to switch into Muddy. Muddy gets hit with a critical Dragon Breath, almost taking me out, but then my Water Pulse is a crit, taking out Flygon. Next in is Salamence, so I decide to switch into Bulb to try to get a Confuse Ray off. Salamence uses Dragon Claw, and it ends up being a crit. I'm able to get a Confuse Ray off, but now I need to switch. I switch into Splashy, and unfortunately I get hit with a Dragon Claw. Next turn I get hit with a Flamethrower, and then I use Ice Beam. Ice Beam almost takes out Salamence, but luckily Salamence eats a Citrus Berry. I'm left with 11 HP, and I'm able to take out Salamence in 1 more Ice Beam. And now we have to face Steven. Real quick though, I do want to say, what is up with his sprite? I mean, he barely has eyes, it looks like. Alright, now we can get to the battle. Steven decides to start off with Skarmory, and I start off with Bulb. Bulb uses Thunderbolt, which does a ton of damage to Skarmory, and then I get hit with a Toxic. Luckily, 1 more Thunderbolt is able to take out Skarmory pretty easily. Next out is Aggron, so I decide to switch into Muddy. Luckily, Muddy is able to take out Aggron in 1 Earthquake. Next in is Cradily, and this could probably be Steven's hardest Pokemon. I decide to go for a Water Pulse, trying to confuse, but then I get hit with a Giga Drain, almost taking out Muddy. I have to switch into Bulb, who is already poisoned, and then I get hit with a pretty strong Giga Drain. I decide to go for Thunder Wave, paralyzing Cradily, and then I get hit with a Confuse Ray. Since I didn't get taken out that turn, I decide to use Confuse Ray, even though that'll probably mean sacrificing Bulb. And again, I didn't get taken out, so I decide to go for Waterfall, and then I do lose Bulb to an Ancient Power. Next, I decide to send in Splashy, who intimidates Cradily, and then Ice Beam does almost half of its remaining HP. Cradily gets paralyzed, and then I'm able to take him out in 1 more Ice Beam. Next, I decide to send in Bali for Claydol, and then I use Rain Dance. I decide to go for a Hydro Pump, and it actually doesn't end up doing that much since Claydol set up Reflect and Light Screen. Next turn I get hit with a critical Earthquake, but I decide to go for Dive, so I won't get hit by any other attacks. Then my next dive is just enough to take out Claydol. Steven's next Pokemon is Metagross, so I decide to send in Splashy. When I send out Gyarados, I forget that the rain is already going, and I decide to try to use Rain Dance, but of course it fails. I get hit with a Meteor Mash, which doesn't do a ton of damage, and then I use Ice Beam, forgetting that that isn't very effective. Next, I get hit with a Hyper Beam, taking out Splashy. Luckily, Metagross must recharge, so I'm able to use Earthquake, almost taking out Metagross. Metagross eats its berry, and then Steven uses a Full Restore, but then I'm able to use Earthquake, almost taking him out, and then Steven again uses a Full Restore, and then my next Earthquake is a crit, taking out Metagross. Next in is Armaldo, so I decide to switch into Bluey. Bluey is not our most powerful Pokemon on this team by far, but I'm able to chip away at Armaldo's health by using Fly and Aerial Ace. Eventually I do get taken out by a Slash, but now I thought it's only proper that we have Muddy finish this challenge off with 1 more Earthquake. And just like that, guys, we have finished our water-only Nuzlock in Pokemon Sapphire. This run was really fun, and if you enjoyed it, please remember to click that like button so I know you want to see more content like this. And I will see you guys in the next video.